Hey, it's Art from My New Microphone. Let's talk about parallel processing in the mix. If you've ever studied electronics and know the difference between series and parallel inside a circuit, you'll have an easy time understanding how parallel processing works in a mix. After all, analog audio is just alternating current, and the first analog mixers that allowed for parallel processing were very much analog circuits. So parallel processing in the mix is when we have an original signal and we have a parallel signal, and we affect the parallel signal before summing the two signals together. This is typically done via an effects send and return situation where we have a track or bus being sent to an effects return channel, and that channel is heavily processed. So again, we will have the original track or bus right here unaffected, and we will have the return channel over here, which will be affected, and both will sum together eventually at the mix bus. However, this can also be done with a wet-dry control, which is a feature that many modern plugins happen to have. By setting up parallel processing via an effects return, we will have much more control over the parallel channel. For one, we'll have independent fader control, so we can adjust the level independent of the original track. And secondly, we will have a full slot of inserts to add any additional processing we see fit. Contrast this to the simple wet-dry controls we have on plugins, which only control the amount of whatever process that plugin is designed to achieve. Compression is perhaps the most common process used in parallel processing. We call this parallel compression, although saturation is another common process to use in parallel processing. Let's hop into the digital audio workstation, and I will quickly show you examples of parallel compression and parallel saturation. All right, here we are inside of Logic Pro, and in this session I want to go over how I set up the routing for parallel compression and parallel saturation, and then how I actually went through and compressed or saturated these effects returns. So the parallel bus right here for compression is only acting on the drums and the pseudo drum room bus that I have here. And we'll get back to that in a second. And then the parallel saturation channel right here is only acting on the vocals. So let's begin with routing. Right here we have the drum bus, and what we have is bus 1 right here. If we go over to our individual drum tracks on the mixer right here, we have everything being routed to bus 1. So everything from here comes out of these channels and goes into the drums bus right here. And then out of the drums bus, we are going to bus 21 and 22. So bus 21 right here is the drum room. These drums were actually recorded in a small vocal booth, and so I felt it necessary to add a little bit of reverb here. This is just Logic's stock reverb to give it a greater sense of ambience and a sense of actually being played in a room. And then from there, both the drums and the drum room are being sent to bus 22, which is the parallel compressor right here. So this is the effects return channel. We see that the input is 22, and we have rather aggressive compression on this channel. So let's first hear how the drums sound on their own, and then we'll have a closer look at the parallel compression bus. So here's just the drums. I'm going to mute the room and the parallel compressor here. Here it is with the pseudo room. So you hear, as I was A-Bing that it just kind of makes it sound fuller and like it was actually played in a larger space. And now let's listen to just the parallel compression bus, which is only acting on the drums, and we will hear how heavily compressed this is. So I'll open up this. You can see that the compressor is acting very quickly. That's why I chose the vintage FET up here in Logic's stock compressor. And we want this gain meter to be moving back and forth very quickly. If we had a slower acting compressor and it was just pinning this compression down around 10 and only really coming back to maybe -8, then we wouldn't really get that aggressive feel of compression. It would be very similar to only having 2 dB of compression and turning the fader down 8 dB. But because we have this wild movement in gain reduction, it gives that really over-compressed feel. Obviously, the makeup gain is not set correctly there, but you heard how it was very open and natural when the compressor was turned off and really crushed when the compressor was turned on. So we don't want to typically lead with the parallel compression. We want to mix it in underneath the drums. So typically if I was mixing, I would have the drum room and drums bus playing, and I would bring in the parallel compression underneath, something like this. Just as a way to thicken it up. Of course, it also makes it louder because we are adding more signal, but it really helps to thicken up the sound without sounding overly compressed. Obviously, this channel itself is over compressed, but we're mixing it in underneath to get that thickening versus leading with that and then bringing in some of the natural channels underneath. Moving on, we have parallel saturation that we should be discussing. Let's listen to this whole track back and listen particularly to the vocals, which have the parallel saturation on them.
Open your eyes, everybody dies, so you must find out a reason why.
So pretty hardcore. We have this scream bus over here. We can see that it's being fed by bus 12. And if we scroll over here, we see that there are multiple scream vocal tracks being fed to bus 12. And then out of that, we are outputting this to bus 15, which is our overall vocal bus, which is right here. If we look here, just all vocals are being bused to this specific bus right here. And then also we are sending out of the scream channel to our parallel bus via bus 25, which over here is the parallel saturation. The input is bus 25. So this saturation plugin I'm using right here is FabFilter Saturn 2. It's a paid plugin. I will leave a link to it in the description below, but it's my favorite saturation plugin that I've tried thus far. So if we listen to just the saturation, we'll hear that it's actually quite distorted.
Open your eyes, everybody dies, so you must find out.
And I find it gives a real intensity, especially when there's the inhale between the lines. Now, if we just listen to the scream vocals on their own and mute the parallel saturation.
Open your eyes, everybody dies, so you.
And then bring in the parallel saturation underneath.
Open your eyes, everybody dies, so you must find out a reason why. Open your eyes, everybody dies.
So it sounds a little intense and overly distorted on its own, but in the context of the mix, it really pushes that energy forward, gets the vocal in front of other instruments in the mix, and really gives the mix what it needs, in my opinion. So that is parallel compression and parallel saturation in a mix. I hope I did a good job really being clear about how the routing worked, because the routing is the more important aspect of this particular lesson. The actual settings that I'm using on the compressor or the saturator here are less important. And because they are often mixed so low, you can get away with really driving them really hard to your heart's content. But that is parallel processing in a nutshell. Now let's hop back outside of Logic Pro. I should mention that the effects send and return setup is also commonly used for time-based effects like delay and reverb, although in these cases we don't typically call it parallel processing. That being said, the whole setup of sending a track or a bus to a specific effects return and then processing that return is very much the same in terms of routing. Although I just showed you parallel processing in Logic Pro, the semantics sometimes change from DAW to DAW or mixer to mixer, which can make things a little bit confusing. However, the overall process or general process remains the same. To be safe and avoid any potential delay or latency between the original track or bus and the effects return or parallel channel, it may be worth adding the same plugins on both the original and the parallel channel. Even if we aren't actually using these plugins to process the audio of the original, it can be worth having the same exact plugins with the same exact delay or latency to make sure that there's no delay or latency between the original and the parallel channels. Having even the slightest delay can cause phase issues that can lead to comb filter-like effects that can really thin out the mix and lead to lackluster results. Of course, many modern digital audio workstations do a fantastic job of plug-in delay compensation, but this is just to be extra safe to avoid any potential phase issues. So that is parallel processing. If you found this video informative, I'd encourage you to hit that like button and subscribe for more content here at the brand new My New Microphone YouTube channel. We're just getting started, and I'd like to thank you for being here. Additionally, I will leave resources in the description box down below worth checking out, and I will also add a few videos in this end screen having to do with mixing that I think will be beneficial to you. So click on one of these, check them out, and I will see you in the next video.